Okay, Christian Meny here, Director of Conservation at Montana Audubon. Big part of my job is the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program, and that's a program that is actually a national Audubon initiative, but Montana Audubon facilitates it across the state of Montana. Let's see. The Conservation Ranching Program spans the western United States all the way from some of the Midwest states to California. And the reason for that is that this is where the last best rangeland and grassland habitats for birds exist and occur. And Montana being no exception to this. The motivation behind the program is that there have been alarming declines in grassland birds. Over 50% of the population has disappeared since the 70s. And this is especially compared to other guilds of birds in different habitats. Grassland birds have really tanked. And that's due to the fact that there's been a lot of sod busting, cropland conversion, and pesticide use in much of the grasslands across the North America and the United States. And so, good news, though, is that Montana is a stronghold for grassland birds. And if you look at these heat maps, you look at some of these grassland-specific species. And again, the reason for this is ranching is alive and well in Montana, and the state of the grassland, as was mentioned before, as Lil mentioned, is very similar to what it was historically. And when we think about these target grassland birds, ranchers are providing a lot of their breeding habitat. And so Montana comprises both the Pacific and the Central Flyway, you see on the map in the left. And most of these priority species actually just breed here, like this long-billed curlew, of which maybe you have in your pastures and rangeland. But in the winter, a lot of these birds end up down in western Mexico and even Central America. So we're essentially breeding many birds, North American birds here in Montana on our grasslands. And so the Conservation Ranching Program, the purpose is to stabilize these bird populations in partnership with private land stewards. And in this case, these are ranchers in Montana. The green seal on the right is part of when a ranch is Audubon certified, they can use this green seal for marketing. And it tells the rancher's story of their good work and land stewardship. And it also can empower consumers to promote land stewardship and bird-friendly practices using their dollar and buying beef and bison products from these ranches. Now, this isn't the only thing that the program does. I just say we support ranchers that have good land stewardship practices so that they can continue to support bird habitat. And so there's some benefits to enrollment in the program. Right now, we're able to pay for the audit and the bird monitoring. So it's mostly just working with me and my staff to become certified. Each ranch, we work with the rancher to write a habitat management plan, and that outlines goals and objectives that the rancher may have to increase not only bird habitat, but forage productivity, biodiversity, and all the good things that regenerative ranching promotes. And along with that, I've been able to find some grant funding for infrastructure projects. So we learn a lot about the ranch through the habitat management plan, and sometimes we can help try to write grants and fund things like grazing systems, including stock water and wildlife-friendly fencing and things like that. We provide bird monitoring, so each ranch gets this really professional, comprehensive inventory of the bird life on their ranch. There's the marketing and the market development. We've been working with WSE with their markets conference, which has been really amazing. And the seal can be used in marketing, and then other workshops and technical development. So our protocols, this is a list of 20 priority grassland bird species in Montana, and we target these. And if you look through this list, in the pink color, we're seeing passerines or songbirds. So that includes things like sparrows, which many of you may think of as the little brown job bird. Long spurs, there's two long spurs that are native to Montana, and they're closely related to sparrows. We've got bobolink and western meadowlark, which are blackbirds, lark bunting, which is a bunting, loggerhead shrike as a predatory songbird, which actually feeds on other songbirds and lizards, as well as insects. Sprague's pipit, which is a pipit. And then in the blue, we're looking at raptors and birds of prey on this priority species list. So we have burrowing owls and a couple of hawks and the golden eagle. And then in brown, we've got the sandpipers, the shorebirds that nest on these grasslands, including long-billed curlew and plover and upland sandpiper. And then finally, we've got our upland game birds there with the greater sage grouse and the sharp-tailed grouse. And so these are our priority birds that we're focused on. However, we love all birds here at Montana Audubon. So we actually do try to work with ranchers to talk about things like the riparian area, for instance, which is not, of course, grassland, but provides cover, food, stopover sites during migration, and of course, clean water. And so you may ask yourself as a rancher, why birds? And looking at a few of these species here, these are all priority grassland bird species. And the reason that I think beyond the inherent value of birds, the beauty that they provide, the song that they sing, and their very interesting behavior, whether they're a bird of prey or a grouse, or of course, they could be game birds. Birds, the value in them are that birds are bioindicators. And so birds do have some ecosystem services they provide. They can eat pests and they can disperse seeds and they can even act as pollinators. But by and large, birds fit into niches and they're primary and secondary consumers on the landscape, depending on what kind of birds we're talking about. The more birds, the more habitat niches that you're creating. And so one of the tenets of our program, I guess there's 3 pillars, and it's habitat management, animal welfare, and biodiversity. And birds are acting as bioindicators. They're expressions of how you're managing your land. And so this crowd knows well about, I think, what we are calling regenerative grazing now. So these prairies and grasslands evolved with grazers, and healthy grasslands need grazers to stay healthy. And with looking at regenerative grazing, you're using cattle to mimic bison. You're grazing areas fairly intensively, and then you're just like bison would, you're moving on and letting the land rest and recover. And so we're trying to restore this functional ecosystem, generally using cattle. And so when you start seeing different kinds of birds that, especially, of course, native birds that were evolved with bison and grazers, they're telling you that you're starting to at least create some kind of functional landscape that is somewhat similar to something that was historically present. And so I'm sure you all probably know well about regenerative grazing, but what its premise is: intensive grazing, high stock density, rotation, recovery. And as you go from right to left in this figure that the Peccani Lodge Health Institute let me use, it tends to increase microbial activity, water retention, soil structure is improved, root structure of native plants, forage productivity, plant productivity, and biodiversity of not only plant species, microbial species, but of course, then we get the pollinators, the insects, and the birds. And it's all a very dynamic system that it works together, and it's complex and interesting. And the more I learn about it, I just feel like there's always something new to learn. And so again, birds, they act as bioindicators. And so we're looking here at 5 different native Montanan species that breed here in Montana on the prairies. And you've got generalists like the western meadowlark that can fit into many different habitat niches, Montana state bird, of course. But then looking left to right, and of course, using grazers to create a mosaic of grassland and habitat, you've got certain birds that fit into niches a little better than others. And so the thick-billed longspur on the left likes more bare, windswept, often on hilltops. Chestnut-collared longspur likes short to medium grass. A Baird sparrow tends to come to thicker and more dense grass. And then on the right there, when you get more shrubs in the system, you get birds such as the loggerhead shrike. And then there's, of course, many other species that, where some you learn about greater sage grouse and how they use different habitats at different times, where maybe their young like to feed in bare ground and then they like to take cover in thicker grass or wet meadows and things like that. So there's certainly overlap between these birds in the habitats, but some are more specialist and some are a little bit more generalist. So with this program, we do monitor all the ranches, and we come out and do year 1 and 2, and then every 3rd year after that. And the data and the results of those in the Audubon program are starting to show that there is an increase in there's actually a National Audubon produces what's called a bird friendliness index, and each ranch gets that. And that's a metric that is composed of things like diversity and abundance for certain priority grassland species. And you can compare that BFI, use that, could compare your land to other adjacent lands and things like, and so on. Just talking more about the results, we've seen success, and our bird data is showing us that there is a increase in abundance generally of priority grassland birds on these ranches that work under these habitat management plans, as well as an increase in functional diversity. And I think we know that biodiversity is one of the major benefits of it, is a certain resilience in time, the more species you have working in an ecosystem. So if anyone's interested in joining the program, feel free to reach out to me, Christian. And it's a pretty short process, a couple months. It says 6 months there. I've definitely done it a little bit quicker than that as far as writing a habitat management plan. I can help you assess whether you're eligible. And we pay for a third-party audit to get the actual certification. And then the monitoring, and I just wanted to share that little piece with you. Megan at Barney Creek Livestock is an Audubon bird-friendly rancher, and they do a great job there. Create a lot of really cool bird habitat between their main ranch and then some of the leased land up on the mountainside. There's some really neat bird diversity that varies between those 2 sites because of the elevation and the different kind of vegetation that grows there. And then they have that really wonderful strip of Barney Creek running through their property that they exclude the cattle for most of the year from. And that creates great cover and food and water. And yeah, Megan is a real rock star. And we're so glad to have her in the program. And that's all I've got.